Hey friends, this is Darnell coming to you once again from the beautiful Bedrock Ministry studio as we march forward with America in Bible prophecy. We are going through the 7 trumpets of the book of Revelation. We have already covered trumpets 1, 2, and 3. We have not yet covered 4, which is what we will cover today, but we've already covered trumpets 5, 6, and 7. Let's just review the 6 that we have covered really quickly to remind you of where we are in the prophetic timeline. So trumpet number 1 was World War I. Trumpet number 2 was World War II. Trumpet number 3 was the Chernobyl nuclear disaster of 1986. We skipped trumpet number 4. Trumpet number 5 was the Kuwaiti oil well fires of Desert Storm and the Gulf War. Trumpet number 6 is the future war coming, World War III, which will kill a whopping 2.5 billion roughly people. The Bible says 1/3 of the population of the world. And so that would be about 2.5 billion people will die in that war. So that places us right in between trumpet number 5, trumpet number 6 as we sit here today. And then of course trumpet number 7, the second coming of Jesus Christ. So the only one left to cover is trumpet number 4. Now trumpet number 4 is the most obscure, I will tell you. It's the clues aren't vast. There's not a lot to go on. There's one verse. I'm about to read it to you. But compared to the other trumpets, especially 3, where Chernobyl, the evidence given to us and the scriptural girth there was undeniable, really ties it perfectly into Chernobyl with the whole wormwood. If you missed that teaching, go back to that one and watch it. Also trumpet number 5, pretty undeniable with the Kuwaiti oil fires and Saddam Hussein. You can relook at that video as well to remind yourself, or if you haven't seen it. But compared to those, trumpet number 4 is rather vague, really, and that's why I saved it to last, because with the overwhelming evidence of the second, all of them really, but especially the third and the 5th trumpet, then we have a good established landmark on either side by which to go off. So we know we're looking for a major world event between 1986 and 1990-91. So it's got to fall within that roughly 5-year period there. So that's what we'll be looking at. But before we jump to that, let's just read the verse as it's given to us in Revelation chapter 8, verse 12. It says, The fourth angel blew his trumpet, and 1/3 of the sun was struck, and 1/3 of the moon, and 1/3 of the stars, so that 1/3 of their light might be darkened, and 1/3 of the day might be kept from shining, and likewise 1/3 of the night. So something happened at this world event that happened between 1986 and say 1990, 91. God did something to affect the sun, the moon, the stars, and the length or the degree to which they shine. Something affected time, essentially. And so that's what we're trying to understand and look at, in addition to seeking out the event itself. So not a lot to go on there, but I want to take you to another passage that also talks about time being shortened. These are the words of Jesus himself when he was responding to the disciples. If you recall in Matthew 24, we've talked about this in previous teaching videos. The disciples had come to Jesus. He was talking about the end of the age, and they said, hey, what are the signs of this day, the end of the age? And in Matthew 24, in verse 22, Jesus, part of his discourse to them, he says, and if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved, but for the sake of the elect, those days will be shortened. Now, so Jesus is saying there, And in the context that he's talking about the final 3.5 years. We know that because if you jump up to about verse 15, he talks about the abomination of desolation, and then he's talking about the great tribulation. So he goes on to say that the great tribulation will be a tribulation that is so much worse than anything that the world has ever seen. Now that in itself is a dramatic statement, because the world has seen some pretty dramatic tribulation. When you look at, World War II killing 52 million people. That's a lot of people to die in a war. You think about the Holocaust. You think about these things that have happened and persecutions and so forth. Jesus is saying that, hey, that pales in comparison to the tribulation that's coming in that final 3.5 years just prior to the second coming of Christ. He says that if those days had not been shortened, no human being could survive it, could be saved. But what he did not say was that he was going to shorten the days right at that point. The shortening of the days could have happened any time prior to that, even before the 3.5 years, the final 3.5 years began. And so that's important to note, because if we couple these scriptures together and we look at the fourth trumpet, in my mind, this is when the days were shortened, and not only in my mind, but some other very smart people as well agree with me on that, or I agree with them, however you want to look at that. So clearly there's something happened here that affects time. Now, what does that mean, affects time? Days being shortened? Well, there's, I guess, two ways that could happen. Number one, you could literally remove some of the days. Okay, in other words, let's say that you originally had, I'm going to pick any random number, 100 days, and you remove 20 of them. Now you've got 80 days. Well, that would be a shortening of the days. But I don't believe that is what is meant here, because one big reason is because in Matthew 24, he clearly talks about the days have been shortened, and he's talking about the final 3.5 years. Now, those final 3.5 years are numbered at least 6 different places throughout the scriptures as being 3.5 years or 42 months. So because of that, I tend to think that it wasn't a reduction of the number of days, but something happens with time itself. Now, I know that sounds a little wild, but hey, we're talking about the God that created everything and set time in motion to begin with. If he in fact chose to, say, for example, speed up time, who's to say that he couldn't do it? Now, some will argue, well, that affects, if you sped up time and we still moved at the same rate of speed, then that would affect, competitions and races and all kinds of things. But there's an answer around that, and it's called Einstein's theory of relativity. And this gets way over my head, I'm going to be honest with you, but essentially from what I understand of it, you could actually change the speed of time and the speed of movement at the same rate, and it would not affect races or anything like that. So that is again, it's a little vague. It's definitely difficult to prove. It's difficult to to punch your finger on something that happened historically and say, well, that proves that that's the answer there to that shortening of the days. But at the same time, it certainly is possible. And because I'm a Bible believer and I believe the word, if God says the days are shortened, then they're shortened. It's as simple as that. But let's set that aside for a moment, and let's get back to our timeline and try to talk about a major world event that happened between Chernobyl and the Kuwaiti oil fires. Okay, so what happened during that time? Well, what happened was something that for some people, probably just slipped right on by. They hardly noticed it, especially here in America, because it didn't happen here in America. Uh, but it definitely affected the world, and that was the fall of the Berlin Wall. You say, well, what would that have to do with the prophetic timeline? Well, let's just remind ourselves that Germany is a major player in the prophetic timeline and in the end time world system. Okay. And so what happened with Germany that led up to the building of the Berlin Wall is really relevant when you consider Europe as a whole and even beyond, because the Soviet Union was very much involved with that. America was very much involved with that. There's major world players that were very much involved with that. And I'm going to explain a little bit about the history of it. I don't want to get it off into the weeds too much because I don't want to lose you, but essentially this goes back to what we've been talking about between the struggle between communism, which if you recall is represented by the red horse of the seals, the first four seals of the book of Revelation, communism, and capitalism, which was the black horse. Remember, you've got a political struggle going on, a religious struggle going on. Well, this relates to the political struggle that is going on between communism and capitalism. And so essentially what happened in a nutshell was the world realized after World War II, 52 million people died. The world realized a couple things. The world realized that Germany has been really the initiator, you might say, of these major world wars that happened up to this point. The Franco-German War of 1870. You talk about World War I. You talk about World War II. Germany is right there in the middle of all that, and so the world community said, "Hey, wait a minute. We have got to find a way to sort of cripple their ability to do this," and so they decided to split, because after World War II, the Soviets had taken over much of Eastern Europe, and then the democratic countries, Western Europe. So there was already this sort of split here going there, but they decided to split Berlin and Germany, East Germany to West Germany, and East Germany would be controlled by the Soviet bloc. West Germany would be more or less controlled by the Americans and France and England. And so that's what happened. Now, here's what's interesting. When that wall was built and that split happened, the world saw that as the death of Germany. Now, this relates. This all ties in. Not only ties into the seals, as I just pointed out, but if you look at the beast of Revelation 13, where it talks about, John says, "I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads." That beast, we've already discovered, is the end time world government. That's what that beast is. The 7 heads refer to the 7 beasts that Daniel saw coming out. It was actually 4 beasts, but one had 4 heads, so it was counted as 7 heads of Daniel 7, where you had Germany, the Soviet Union, you had Great Britain, and you had this 10-horned beast, which we now know is the revised Holy Roman Empire, or the European Union. Well, in Revelation 13, he says here, "And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet were like a bear's, its mouth like a lion's mouth, and to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. Well, the dragon is Satan. So Satan is empowering this end-time world government, okay? But what I want you to understand there is the leopard is in there, and we know that the leopard is Germany. Now, how does this tie in? Because if you read on, it says, one of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. Okay, so that mortal wounding was the building of the Berlin Wall. And that's why I said a moment ago that when the Berlin Wall was built and this split of Germany happened, the world basically kept saying this is the mortal wound, this is the death of a nation, this is, and that's one of the heads. Some people look at that scripture there that I just read, one of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound. It's been taught in prophecy before through religious leaders that means that the Antichrist will be killed and then come back to life, but that's not what that's talking about. If you understand the beast that we're looking at here, and you understand from our study of Daniel 7 that this refers to nations, then you're looking for the death or the mortal wound of a nation. And again, by understanding history and current world events even, we can understand prophecy. It's what I've been saying all along. So we know that the major world event that happened between 1986 and 1990-91 was the tearing down of the Berlin Wall, which at that time was held as being the healing of the mortal wound of that nation. So it's the same language. It was in newspapers. It was all over the place. This is the language that the world used when the Berlin Wall was put up and the division of Germany happened. They called it the mortal wound. When the Berlin Wall was torn down and Germany was reunified, then they held it as the healing of the mortal wound. So again, Bible over 2,000 years ago is using language that God foresaw would be used when the events happen in modern times. So just goes to show that God is the God, the timeless God. He knows all things. He is omniscient, and he has given us these clues. Now, let me just talk about another reason why this is so significant is because when the Berlin Wall came down, not only was it the healing of the mortal wound, but it was also the launch of the New World Order. You've probably heard that term before, and the New World Order is in fact the world government that is represented as the beast in Revelation 13. So all of this unfolding is really the unfolding of prophecy right before our very eyes, and so the collapse of the Berlin Wall is the fourth trumpet. It happened in 1989, and it launched us, the world, into this new world order and set us on a path that we've been on ever since then, that is continued to make way for this world government system that so many are fighting for as we speak even. So all of this started after World War I with the League of Nations that eventually kind of fizzled out, and then after World War II we had the birth of the United Nations, all in attempts to bring us to a world government. Since then, we've had the development of the world banking system, the world this, world that. Everything is now moving toward globalism, and it's all socialistic in its roots, which is rooted in communism. There's so many details I could go into. I don't have time to go into all of them. But if you want to research these things on your own, you will find out that this new world order, which is on the back of your dollar bill, is something that is going to happen. And in world government is coming. It is the beast of Revelation 13, and the events of the trumpets have all played a part in that. So now we have looked at the seven seals of the book of Revelation. We've looked at the seven trumpets of the book of Revelation. We have talked about the timing of the rapture according to the prophetic timeline given to us in the scriptures. We've talked about the rise of this world government and the one world religion and how they will move together. We have covered a lot of ground, my friends. These are exciting times to live in. We are watching prophecy being fulfilled right before our very eyes. I wish there was a way that I could reach through the screen and flip a switch and make people understand how important it is to understand these things, because the times are coming when this information that I'm giving you will be vitally important, and people will be hungry for it, and you and I need to continue to prepare ourselves to be those that have knowledge of these things that God can use in the end times to draw people to the Savior and prepare for the great revival that is to come. Hey, this is Darnell coming to you from the beautiful Bedrock Ministry studio. Let's go change the day.